Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a series of events called Writing Is, inspired by texts we're looking at in class at Maynooth University. And I'm going to begin with a quote from John Berger. We never look at just one thing, we're always looking at the relation between things and ourselves. Our vision is continually active, continually moving, continually holding things in a circle around itself, constituting what is present to us as we are. John Berger published this seminal text of art theory in 1972, Ways of Seeing, and that taught us that art needed a language and required a narrative to make sense. These events are supported by my residency at Maynooth University and by Kildare Arts Office, and I'm extending Berger's theories on art into a wider creative field, exploring practice with leading writers, artists and publishers. And I'm joined in sunny Ballymun tonight by Maria Fusco and Kathryn Scanlan. Kathryn Scanlan lives in Los Angeles. She's the author of The Dominant Animal 2020. Her work has appeared in Noon, and I believe you have a new story in the current Noon, what we can talk about then, Granta and Fence in the Paris Review. Her story, The Old Mill, was selected by Michael Cunningham for the 2010 Iowa Review Fiction Prize. She has degrees in painting, writing and English from the University of Iowa and the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Her debut novel, Og Nine Fog, is a literary adaptation of a found diary and was published by FSG in 2019. Maria Fusco is a Belfast-born writer. She works across the registers of fiction, performance and theoretical writing. Her award-winning work is translated into 10 languages. Recent performance work includes Eczema 2018, a touring performance commissioned by the National Theatre of Wales to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the NHS, Master Rock 2015, a repertoire for a mountain commissioned by Art Angel and BBC Radio 4. Recent books include Give Up Art, collected critical writings of which James Elkin has said, after a book like this, most non-fiction seems curiously unaware of what writing can be, and Legend of the Necessary Dreamer 2017, an ambient novella described by Chris Kraus as a new classic of female philosophical writing. She is currently Professor of Interdisciplinary Writing at the University of Dundee. Maria, I think you're going to present work first.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks for inviting me. It's really nice to be able to virtually meet everybody speaking into a screen, and also to be reading alongside Kathryn, whose work I really admire. So it's great for me on a selfish level, and I hope you enjoy the reading. I have a little special reading for you tonight, which Susan's going very kindly to help me with. And I'm going to read a whole book for you, but don't worry, it's quite a short book. Really, it's a short essay. And the book's entitled With a Baku, Reading When Attitudes Become Form. The book was originally commissioned by the curator Germano Chilant for the remaking of When Attitudes Become Form, which many of you will know is a kind of seminal, it's a seminal exhibition curated in 1969 by Harold Seisman. And what was important about it, I guess, for what we're talking about today, was that it was very much the first moment when there was a kind of sense of artist writing as kind of catalogue and book, and that really overpowered the exhibition. So it was restaged as part of the Venice Biennale, and Germano Chilant invited me to write about it, which I did. And then he didn't like what I wrote and told me he didn't want it. And I said, okay, that's fine. Fuck you, I'm going to publish it anyway, which I did. So that's what you're going to hear today. And basically it's about spending time. The short piece is about spending time with this kind of seminal artist publication. It follows the form of the original publication, and it extends across, it's a modular piece of writing. So each entry with the artist speaks towards something about the methodology of the artist, but together combines into a whole essay piece. Probably me having explained that is longer than the actual reading itself. So I'll now just begin.
Andre, Carl.
Bibliographical systems of classification may only function fully when their internal logic is lucid on the surface.
Anselmo Giovanni.
Whilst the outer texture of such a surface may appear oily or grubby through repeated use, interior fibres retain freshness.
Artschwager Richard.
Such an interior is immutable by means of the union of logic and pulp.
Bang Thomas.
The book on a shelf becomes soiled simply through sitting on that shelf.
Bark Jared.
In this way, the book does not necessarily require a reader.
Barry Robert.
A reader may intervene in the book's hygiene, but this can only ever be a minor augmentation. It's impractical for a reader to be in constant physical contact with the book.
Boyce Joseph.
Motivated to accurately locate the resistance of the book to a reader's paw, imagining that in the book will be preserved in an archive, that the book will be preserved in an archive, whilst a reader will be interred in a box.
Buckner Mel.
Those persons who retain a historiographical relationship with the book concern themselves more intimately with that which cannot be seen or handled of the book.
Boiti Alejero.
Compression and survival cannot be picked apart.
Ocean Marinus.
Comprehension is a durational summons.
Bollinger Bill.
Over time accreting into a reflective activity.
Buta Michal.
Habit.
Calzolari Pier Paolo.
To physically experience the profundity of critical capacity, to feel its tremors release in peculiar logic.
Cotton Paul.
Slipping behind.
Darboven Hannah.
No matter what the conditions, if just such a stroke of comprehension is denied or even diminished, critical capacity may not be fully realized.
Dibbits Jan.
For these tremors do not wrench, they mend.
Van Elk Gar.
The removal of visible means of support presupposes survival.
Ferrer Raphael.
Presupposes survival by expressing a very particular fullness of capacity.
Flanagan Barry.
Nobody's name began with G.
Hecke Hans.
Brimmen.
Heiser Michael.
Lappin.
Hesse Eva.
Tipping out.
Hubler Douglas.
Capacity extinguishing the impetus for legacy by presupposing survival.
Icaro Paulo.
Residue is that which is fearful of being erased.
Jacques Alain.
Residue desires to reside unaccosted as a singularizing marker of a moment recalled.
Jenny Neal.
A moment now past.
Kaltenbach Steve James.
Perhaps enjoyed, perhaps endured in spite. Such a moment lasts as long as it's needed.
Kaplan Joanne.
With guile and craft, residue situates itself as the self-appointed mourner of just such a moment, demarcating time through solidifying necessity.
Keinholz Edward.
Residue harvests these accumulated solids, shaping, moulding, refining and hardening friction into fingerprints.
Klein Eve.
Oh,
Koseth Joseph.
fingerprints illustrate that necessity is a small sort of violence.
Cornelis Yanis.
Small sorts of violence are neither compulsory nor disciplinary. That which has been gained through violence ceaselessly passes from one to the other, unable to efface ownership.
Kun Gary B.
Gravity leading the page's weight to meet another page, trying to hear through the whirls of a finger and thumb, trying to hear the wooden fabric of the page soften to a curve.
De Witt, Saul.
The nature of ownership is such that it protects that which is owned.
The Low House, Burnt.
What is it good for?
Long, Richard.
Protection is secure as long as that which is owned demonstrates usefulness through outwardly assigned forms of labour.
Low, Rolliff.
What is it for?
McLean, Bruce.
The removal of visible means of support makes it difficult to decipher that which is labour and that which is not labour.
De Maria, Walter.
What is it?
Medalla, David.
Remnant is that which cannot be erased.
Mertz, Mario.
Erasure is only possible if the nature of that which is to be erased can be identified without doubt.
Morris, Robert.
Conservation is only possible if the nature of that which is to be conserved can be identified without doubt.
Neumann, Bruce.
Identification is achieved through exhaustive comparison with equivalent materials in order to secure nature.
Oldenburg, Klaus.
A restricted chain of repeated acts.
Oppenheim, Dennis.
Repeated acts and close observation.
Panamarenko.
Close observation and analytical deduction.
Pascali, Pino.
Analytical deduction and quantification of content.
Hector, Paul.
Quantification of content and separation of elements.
Pistoletto, Michelangelo.
Separation of elements.
Prini, Emilio.
Nobody's name began with Q.
Rights, Marcus.
Antidote, reason. The contrary to antidote may also be antidote.
Rippersberg, Allen.
Remnant cannot be erased because it has no equivalent materials.
Ruthenbeck, Reiner.
Nor can remnant be incorporated into a whole because it is not part of anything.
Ryman, Robert.
Remnant will not imitate the whole.
Sandbach, Frederick Lynn.
Remnant does not fit in.
Sarette, Allen.
Vulnerability and fatigue constitute existence.
Sarkis.
The more developed and precise the book's philological operations are, the more vulnerable the book is to fatigue.
Schneider, Jean-Frédéric.
Vulnerability and fatigue constitute existence by mimicking that which must be rescued, nurtured, and respected.
Sarah, Richard.
Residue approximates vulnerability and fatigue, manufacturing material from form, welcoming that which has been omitted.
Smithson, Robert.
Philological fatigue does not apologize.
Sonnier, Keith.
The more developed and precise the book's editorial operations are, the less prone the book is to such residual vulnerability and fatigue.
Tuttle, Richard.
Nobody's name began with U.
Viner, Frank Lincoln.
Remnant is environmental in character.
Walter, Franz Earnhardt.
Demotic environmental editorial operations bolster a reader's attachment to the book.
Wegman, William G.
Securing entreaty to return, to return, to return.
Wiener, Lawrence.
The interior of the book knows when the surface is being read.
Wiley, William T.
Nobody's name began with X.
Zorio, Gilberto.
Nobody's name began with Y. Thank you.
Thank you. I suppose I read this earlier today, and if it reveals anything to me, it's how little I know how to pronounce most artists' names. I only ever see them written down. Kathryn, we'll talk about that piece in a minute, Maria. But Kathryn, I suppose I wanted to start by asking you about art and writing. Why did you make the switch from painting to writing? Do you see the two as mutually exclusive, or is it more a case of it not being one thing or another thing, but all part of the same practice?
Well, when I was painting, I was painting mostly. The last time that I was really like actively painting was sort of like when I was in undergrad. I had a a great studio, free studio through my university. And then I was continuing to do it a little bit when I moved to Chicago. But I feel like I mostly stopped doing it just because of there was a space constraint, and I also started to just kind of feel strange about continuing to produce these objects that I would then have to like live with and carry around with me. And I mean, you know, potentially, I guess, try to like do something with, or, you know, exhibit or sell or something like that. But all of that just started to feel really strange to me, and not like something I necessarily wanted to do. But I was sort of, you know, I was writing all that time. It wasn't like giving up painting and starting writing. I started, I mean, I was doing both, like as a child. I was like illustrating little stories that I would write. And what was it? How did you phrase the rest of your question? Sorry, about how they relate, or?
Yeah, are they mutually exclusive practices? But I guess you've answered that, unless you're an inactive painter now. You just don't paint anymore. Is that true?
Well, no, actually, I've been making little things recently, just on my desk, on like boxes, cut up boxes and things. That I feel like that's another part of it too, is just this, like, you know, consuming these materials, like buying all these materials. So but yeah, I've been making little things recently, and I do think that there is a very different there's a very different feeling to both of them. Like when I started like moving some paint around again, it was it was such a nice feeling. You know, writing it, I find fairly difficult. And also my husband is a painter, and I'm sort of like jealous of him a lot of the time, because you know, he'll kind of wake up in the morning and and be listening to music, and just kind of having a nice day painting, and he'll paint outside a lot. We've got a little outdoor area here, and I'm meanwhile like in my office, in my chair in front of my computer, just really uncomfortable. And
would you see them both just as ways of telling stories, really? Because once a painting is completed, it's kind of fixed as words would be on a page.
Sorry, painting are you saying is
Painting
painting
as a narrative, yeah,
as fixed as? I think that I mean, I think that when I was making more paintings, I was sort of like trying to do this narrative, this visual narrative with them. But there's something, I feel like what's really appealing to me about painting and just about visual art in general, and maybe this even like goes against the Berger quote that you read at the beginning, but I think that you know, there's something about it that's like, you know, nonverbal, or at least, you know, it can be that way. And there's a way that you can communicate with an image that you can't really communicate with words necessarily. And that's not to say that one is better than the other, or that it's, you know, always that way or whatever. But I think that there's something appealing to me about just the sturdiness of the image, or the in itself of the image. I don't know. I've been working a lot lately with these sort of like found photographs, and pairing them with text, or trying to pair them with text. And it's just, I mean, photographs are different than painting, obviously, but they really, it's really difficult. I'm not saying anything new. People have, you know, always said this, but yeah, it's strange to try to pair them, and it's strange to try to talk about them in relation to each other, I feel like, always. And for me, well,
Maria, you've spoken before about writing as performance. Could you tell me what you mean by that?
Just unmuting myself. Well, I think the writing and the reading are both performative. I mean, I'm not sure I'd describe them as performance, but I think they're certainly performative. And I think that, you know, for instance, with that little reading there, you know, there is the notion of exhaustion through the repetition in that. So it kind of exhausts itself out, and there's a notion of fatigue in it, and there's a notion of kind of performing the fatigue. Which interests me about how that can happen within a short piece, in terms of the way that you know, the way I've written it, I've constructed it to be like that, obviously. And I think that in the essence that I suppose that we all perform, we are all performing ourselves all at the same time, you know, we're all performing constantly and performing ourselves constantly. I suppose I would then extrapolate that onto any activities that we're involved in of any sort, we are performing them as we're doing them to ourselves and to other people. And I think what's quite interesting about that in regards to reading work out and the listening to work, for instance, being read out, is the unfinished quality of that. And I often like to make readings from work which is work in progress and kind of hasn't quite been resolved properly, and to think about those kind of performative acts of reading, let's say, as an editorial process, and how I and how others, let's say, might use our own voices as editorial tools, which I know that we do internally, but to really be quite clear about how that becomes external. And I think that there is something about finding a place through the performance of that. And also, I guess, because I work in a very interdisciplinary way, each time I return to find the form of it, and the forms are often very radically different from each other, and I can't presuppose what they're going to be until I am involved in the making of it. And somehow, reflecting on that just now, that seems to point very clearly towards its performance of self, I think.
Actually, that was going to be one of my questions, how you decide what form your work takes. Like Master Rock, for example, was a live performance, but it was also a broadcast, and it's also a book. And Legend of the Necessary Dreamer, you describe as an ambient novel written in real time. At what point do you know the form it's going to take, or is it a matter of having a starting point for a specific project? Mm-hmm. Or does it evolve as it goes along?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I mean, with Master Rock, just as an example, the reason why the live performances happened for Master Rock, they happened to be the broadcast. So they happened to be the broadcast because they needed to be performed inside the granite cave, inside the mountain where it was made, to get the right texture of performance with it, to get that kind of unfinished sort of, you know, quite stagey sort of performative voice with it.
It's a power station in Scotland.
I should say, it's a power station inside a granite mountain on the west coast of Scotland, and one of the voices in it is Denise Riley's voice, which has this very brittle, throaty, sort of soft porny sort of a quality to it, which is very appealing to listen to, I think. So I guess with the form, for me, Susan, the form very much follows the content. And I'd say that my work is very archivally and very process led. And of course, that's the nice bit, isn't it? Doing the archival stuff. The archival stuff's great. And then you have to then forget all of the archival stuff. So I think maybe the form begins to come for me when I've forgotten what I've learned to do when I started off doing the project. I think it becomes more apparent.
I loved the bit in Legend of the Necessary Dreamer where you said that the palace is an amplifier. It's almost as if the walls could talk. And you also said that you were given kind of archival research material by your hosts who were in a residency there, but you only looked at it out of politeness and didn't use it for the text.
Yes, I mean, I do much of what I do out of politeness and not because I actually want to do it.
Is that your motivation, either politeness or fuck you, I will publish this?
Yeah, yes, I think there's definitely, I think that's definitely true, and I think that would be very common to a lot of Northern Irish people, that they do things either because they're afraid that they're going to be beaten if they don't do it, so they do it out of politeness, or they do it out of fuck you, I'm going to do it whatever way I want. And obviously I'm saying that relatively flippantly, but I actually do mean that to be true, because I think that, again, I think that refinding of form and the remaking, I've spoken about this quite a lot before, but the remaking of making yourself into an amateur each time when you work across discipline is it's really significant, and giving yourself over to what that actually means to yourself, being always the amateur and putting yourself into that feels very, very significant. And it does feel like a point. I don't particularly see it as a point of vulnerability, actually, because I think it's a sound intellectual and creative position to start from. But sometimes I guess it is quite nice to feel that you know what you're doing.
Kathryn, I was reading your essay that you wrote on craft for Granta magazine, the one where you say, I try to write a sentence as unbudging and fully itself as some object sitting on a shelf in my office. And I was just thinking of that because you mentioned making objects and having them on your desk. But I was also thinking of what Christine Schutz said about your stories, the dominant animal. She said that Kathryn Scanlan whittles sentences into weapons. And I was thinking of a text actually from Maria's book, Master Rock, where a character, and I'm using that term loosely, Elizabeth Faulkner, because it is in fact a real person, and she's a muralist, and she says, the frame allows the picture to exist. The border dismisses a misunderstanding. Knowing what to leave out, that's the hardest trick to learn. And it seems to me, Kathryn, that your sentences are almost like sculptures. They're carefully chiseled and refined. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely what I'm trying to do. And I think that the process of like composing sentences for me is, probably as much of a exercise in omission as it is in, addition.
And I'm thinking also of how you composed Ognine Fog. And you said to an interviewer around the time of publication that the result is an abundance of white space, the page repurposed as a stage. Could you maybe explain what Ognine Fog is and how it came to be?
Ognine Fog is a book that I made from a diary that I found. It was written by a person that I don't know, and it was going to be discarded, and it was a 5-year diary, and so the woman who wrote it filled it up completely. So it was pretty much 400 solid pages of very small script handwriting, and it was an object that I found at a time when I was making a lot more visual art, and I originally thought of it as that, and thought that I might do something with it visually, and so that but I didn't ever, nothing ever seemed right, and I didn't read it for a while, but then when I started to read it was when I decided that I wanted to work with it textually, and but I think that because I had originally, because of the object itself, it's like sort of beauty, the physicality of it, and because I had originally been thinking of it in that context, I think that sort of continued in the way that I was thinking about it as a text, and really wanting to, because there was something really great and interesting about the book as a whole, you know, it's very overwhelming, the amount of information that's in here. But I think that there was a sort of like central feeling that I was getting from it and from the voice of this woman that I really wanted to clear away and present it in this way, you know, almost like on a stage or in a gallery, with the space around it that would give the words the impact that I felt like they had on me, but that I felt, you know, might be lost if you were just reading sentence after sentence after sentence, which I originally did. Like my first sort of attempt at working with it textually was something that was actually, I sent to Diane Williams at Noon, and was in Noon. And it was just this sort of like run-on document, you know, which is a lot closer to how it felt to read the original text. But I think that I think about writing, or like the arena of writing in general, as sort of like a stage, this sort of like empty stage where anything can happen.
It's an exquisite book, and you spent, was it close to 10 years working on it?
Yeah,
reworking it.
Yeah.
Did you not get sick of spending so much time with the text?
I did. Oh yeah, it drove me nuts, but in a good way. I seem to be drawn to these sort of. I've got like several other things that are similar that I've been working on, and there's something about these kind of like frustrating projects that I like. But I think, you know, that I ended up working on that so long because it was mostly, I mean, I did a lot of like, you know, moving around and rearranging and putting things in and taking them out and figuring out the structure. And it took me a while even to just get to the place of like, of knowing that I wanted to present each page so sparely, you know. But I think that a lot of that time was just, you know, thinking about it and sort of deciding, you know, like conceptually what this book would mean. And then it also was this kind of companion exercise book in a way to working on my stories, where, you know, I would get stuck on my stories and I would go to this text and just work with words and work with sentences. And I think that it, you know, taught me a lot about editing in that way.
There's a question has just popped up actually from Colin O'Shea. Do you feel, Kathryn, that your own writing has changed in any way after the excision that became Old Nine Fog? Did it change the way? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, yes, I think so. But it also, I was working on The Dominant Animal and Og Nine Fog at the same time. So both of them about roughly 10 years and, you know, right next to each other. So I think that, you know, one influenced the other probably also, you know, but I do think that definitely working with Og Nine Fog changed the way that I was editing and approaching my stories as well.
Kathryn, could I ask you to read something maybe at this point?
Yeah, sure thing. I guess I'll just, I don't know, I was gonna read one or two stories, but maybe I'll just read one from The Dominant Animal. The story is called Playhouse. They are a family of 4, our neighbors, with one biological son and one adopted, but so near in age and similar in appearance, it seems a little funny, as if the parents had their minds set on twins. The boys do not like each other, and they do not like their parents, and their parents do not like each other, and they do not like their sons, neither one of them. In the morning, as the father backs his car into the street, one son runs from the house and throws himself onto the hood. The father honks until the boy rolls off, sullen, his arms hanging like clubs. Inside the house, the mother will scream for minutes at a go. We have our hands on the phone to call someone about it, but then she stops, steps out onto the patio, sits and props her feet onto the ottoman, and lights a cigarette. Her hair is smooth and her clothes look pressed and cool. Sometimes comes the surprise of another day, another night ending quietly and without incident. The father returns from work and drinks a beer on the patio. The boys play basketball in the drive. The mother flips pieces of food on the grill. But in the small hours of the morning, one son is chasing the other in the yard with a pair of scissors. It is early enough that we could be dreaming it, the half-clad boys running and tumbling like satyrs in the blue light of the lawn. Our dream disperses when the father bangs out of the house, puffed up, trailing his untied bathrobe. He throws his arms around the scissor carrier, and they topple into the grass together. At any hour, the father can be seen tending his property. We've awakened at midnight to the sound of his mower. There is little in the way of ornament, though the shrubs are kept neatly cubed. Between their lawn and ours is a child's playhouse, sturdily built, with real glass windows and a slide and 2 swings. When the snow melts in bleak spring, the father sands the sides of the family's house and the playhouse and touches up the peeled places. He stands on a ladder using the same paint, a medium milky brown, for both buildings. In the early evening, when daylight lingers a little longer than it did the day before, when the father has finished his work and put away his tools and stands in his bare brown yard appraising, we see how the 2 structures look like 2 of the same animal, large and small, grown and juvenile, or parent and offspring. On an afternoon while the parents are away, the boys are outside doing things they are forbidden to do. Slowly, they start to shove each other toward the playhouse. They stand in front of it a while, throwing pieces of grass as hard as they're able, but the grass only falls peacefully to their feet. They sit on the swing seats, their bottoms hanging out the backs, and their ankles dragging under them. The boys stand and put their hands on the playhouse. They grab it and mount their long bodies onto it, rocking it from its rutted resting place. They climb inside. We can see wedges of them pressed up to the glass. The playhouse shudders on its stilted legs and the boys do not come out. The sun drops into the trees and the grass goes dark. When the parents return, the car's beams swing across the lawns, ours and theirs, and come to rest at the raw, unfenced spot where the playhouse sits. The mother and father wait with the engine running. The ungainly thing begins to tremble. Then one boy drops out and stumbles into our early, flesh-pink rhododendron. The other son follows and falls face first into our bleeding heart. There is some permanent damage. Our house is similar in color to our neighbors, awkward and glass-fronted. The houses on our block are not old, but look all vaguely historical. All built, it seems, with no concern other than getting the best possible view of the sunset.
Thank you. So it makes sense to me now that you said you wrote the dominant animal in tandem with Ognain Fog, because there's a lot of crossovers between the 2 works, actually. Like food, for example, is a major part. Eggs, especially for some reason, in the dominant animal. Dogs in the dominant animal. Why so many dogs?
Well, I think the simplest answer is that I really like dogs, and I like to watch them and see what they do. And I had a dog the whole time I was writing these books. And I grew up with a lot of animals. I grew up really surrounded by animals in a way that didn't seem, that weird to me at the time, although maybe it did. I guess I would go to friends' houses and they wouldn't really have the situation that we had. But more and more as I get older, it just seems like that was a really kind of unique experience. And I think it really informed the things that I'm interested in. I mean, I just have a lot of animal stories that I know and that have happened to me or people that I know, or I think I'm just, and I'm just sort of like drawn to it whenever I hear something from someone or see something, or, you know, it seems like it's always this animal interest.
And of course, other similarities being the weather and death and
Yeah.
so on. And that's something, Maria, that you touch on quite often. Talking of preoccupations in writing, Maria, how's your Donald Sutherland project coming along?
Oh, well,
Oh, don't ask.
Just on the death note, before we get on to the happy note of Donald, I was clearing out my mum's house. My mum had to go into residential care, you know, and I was clearing out her house. And there was a jotter from primary school, and the teacher had written on it, "Well written, but morbid, Maria." It was like, what was funny about it was like 7, and it was quite funny, and it had well written but morbid, comma, Maria, you know. I didn't know there, so you know, it was very sort of melodramatic the way she did it. But also, you know, if she'd have grown up, if the woman had been living in the middle of the Troubles, I think that she probably would have been preoccupied with morbidity. Donald's on the hold at the moment. So for those of you who perhaps not aware, and there's no reason why you should be, I have an ongoing project about the actor Donald Sutherland, who I'm, you know, slightly obsessed by. But it's a really specific, I'm only interested in films between 1970 to 1980, and I work with each film and kind of produce a new piece of work. So that's slightly on hold at the moment, and I'll return to it. I mean, I saw him recently on television. He looks like he might be on his last legs, you know, so my chance to, you know, finally get married to him is probably, you know, being more and more reduced. I wanted to reflect on something you're talking about earlier with Kathryn about doing more than one thing at once, I think, you know, and that kind of how those modular, to use that word again, activities, you know, work with each other. And like I also studied at art school, and I did sculpture, and I was really interested with Kathryn because I felt exactly the same, Kathryn. I had these things and I didn't really want them, actually. You know, I didn't really know what to do.
Yeah.
And I worked in a foundry towards the end of college just for money. And it turned out what I was good at doing, which I had no idea I'd be good at doing, was people would bring a commercial foundry and people would bring in objects and say, can you cast this in blah, or, you know, that type of thing. And it turned out what I was good at doing was conceptualizing the shape of the molds. That's what I was really good at doing.
Oh wow, I love that.
It's very niche in particular, but I've only realized relatively recently that in terms of finding form, that's exactly that sort of search for form, let's say, that it's the same basic desire and craft or skill or ability or sensibility maybe. And I find that interesting, and I think Kathryn, what you're saying about this kind of producing in tandem and this sort of, in a sense, the refreshing quality of working between a number of projects at the same time feels very important, and also feels very much like, I think particularly within writing, that it's something that you shouldn't be engaging in. That you should be engaging in. Yeah, that you should be engaging in. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that it's one of those things that I sometimes will like kind of let myself buy into that, and then I very quickly am like, no, that's not right, or that's not how I work. And I find that when I do let myself be looking at these other things and working on these other things, and especially things that are more related to visual art, it is what I need, you know, to be working on my writing. It is absolutely the missing element that is, you know, preventing me from doing the work that I want to do, even though I'm trying to like focus, you know.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I think it's something, I mean, I tend to work on, you know, maybe certainly 2 very big projects at the same time, and at the moment I'm just happen to be working on 4, and there's no, I mean, it's stupid, it is stupid in a way, but it's just the way that, you know, and some of them will, you know, they're not all happening right now. They'll take me a long time to do. And I do find it very interesting that there is this idea that it's very negative to spread your focus across different forms and different ways of working. So, and it isn't really something that I've heard many people speaking about in regards to writing. And I find it very interesting, because it seems very obvious to me that you need a break if you're working on a longer project, on a complex project. You need a bit of a break from that project to refresh your eyes on something else. And also, you say that sort of how we teach ourselves editorial skills as writers. No one can teach us that. We can only teach ourselves that, I think. Well, I don't think anybody, I say that as somebody who works as an academic, you know, I don't essentially think, you know, I think those things have to be learned through practice, let's say. I find it really interesting. I find it refreshing to be able to say that. And it seems to me just to be a sensible way to proceed in a writing practice, that you need to be working at things of different scales and of different speeds, I think, actually, as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that it relates to what you were talking about earlier about, you know, becoming the amateur again each time you come to one of these projects. And I think that there's something there that's like, there's this expectation that we should not be the amateur, you know, that we should be the expert or the master, and that to dilute yourself, you know, in this way, or to be focusing on a lot of different things at once is like, you know, it's like that phrase, jack of all trades, but master of none. But I think that you know, the idea of the amateur is like one of the most important sort of like mindsets that you can bring to what you're doing, because I think that it just, I mean, for me anyway, it's everything starts with sort of looking at something or thinking about something with as little preconception as possible, you know, just approaching something like you've never seen it before, or like you've never thought about it before. And I think that, you know, there's some essential naivete to it that is important to me.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And I think also, well, I wonder, I'm sorry, Susan, I feel like we've sort of, you know, but
okay, I'm enjoying this.
I wonder if the kind of, if they're working on more than one thing, and for instance, sometimes often publishing in whatever form more than one thing at the same time, I wonder if the challenge in that, if you like, is to do with readerships, and with you know, readerships rather than I'm just going to say writerships, and I know I've just made that word up, but you know what I mean. It's less to do with the kind of writing of it, and more to do with the reading of it. And if there are materials that one produces that are kind of doing or operating in slightly different ways, let's say, or trying to do, and I think this idea of naivete and this kind of idea of like a fresh eye, let's say, and a kind of inspecting, but also kind of fresh and a bit dopey, let's say, you know, in a good way. I wonder if there is something within that in regards to audience and readerships and placement, rather than to do with the actual. And that's why it's just courage to work on more than one thing simultaneously, because also there's an idea about getting stuff finished, isn't there?
I was just going to ask, actually, with all these projects on the go, do you ever abandon something, write it off as something that you don't want to bring to completion, give it up? Or do you park it and maybe come back to it at a future date? Is there a point where you walk away from something and say, this isn't working, it's not going to work? I don't want to make it work.
Is that for the two of us, Susan?
For the two of you, yeah.
Oh. I think that I'm never really willing to like admit that something is, you know, maybe I'll put it aside if it's not working, or and just assume that at some point maybe it'll come together. And I think that too is like, you know, this idea of wanting to finish things and wanting to publish things and, you know, have something to like show for your work is part of this like pressure, anxiety to like either finish something or abandon it. And I think that, I don't know, I think that I just have like I try to have like a longer view of things and just think like, just because something feels like a failure now doesn't mean that it will suddenly be something that I'm really pleased with, you know, at some point in the future. But
I think that it's, yeah, I think it's very difficult not to really try and believe in the project that you're doing, because otherwise it'd be, you know, it would be very difficult to do it, to like force yourself to do it, because often the doing of it is quite unpleasant and it is labor. And I also personally really genuinely don't expect people to be interested in what I'm interested in. I genuinely don't, like, I really don't. And yet I produce stuff and have a desire to share things, you know. And with, for instance, the Donald Sutherland thing, I mean, that is the kind of really quite shameful and slightly embarrassing, you know, passion. But it's not my most shameful or embarrassing passion, because if it wasn't, I wouldn't share it. So I think that, I mean, for instance, I have several, I have a novella that took me a very, very long time to write, that's written from the point of view of a monkey during the Blitz in Belfast, and it's written in phonetic dialect. It's impossible to publish. It's impossible. It's very hard to read. Very hard to publish. And there's a project that I'm working on now, which is like a working class opera, and I'm really, you know, into it, and I really hope it will happen, and it should happen, but it may not. It may not happen. So I think that I'm quite stubborn. I think we're quite stubborn in terms of finishing something, let's say. Mm-hmm. In the same way, I'm probably a bit like, you have to finish all your food on the plate. Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think yeah, no, I definitely have that. I feel like I have that same stubborn feeling. And I think that's why, yeah, I kind of say that I'm not willing to call anything a failure, or, you know, disregard anything that.
What do you think about this idea of people being interested in what you're interested in? Because listening to, you know, some of the things you're saying before, they're very kind of, you know, it's a very long, very focused production and research process with, you know, as you describe it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, maybe I'm just curious, because we're talking, I'm just curious what you think about that, like people being interested in, whether it's even important to think that people are going to be interested in what you're interested in, you know?
Yeah, I never really think about that. I think that I just work on what I'm interested in and hope that, you know, like maybe someone else will be interested, you know, because that will mean that it can get published or be seen by other people. But it's not something where, yeah, I'm not ever really thinking about, you know, like, oh, I should work on this because this seems like something people will like.
Oh, know? Yeah. No, that wasn't really what I meant. Yeah. I didn't really mean it in that way. Yeah.
But you just meant it in the way of like feeling like people probably aren't going to be interested in like what you're interested in, or.
I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't necessarily have, I'm just glancing at a book that's on the table beside me, which is Bob Gluck book, Communal Nude, Collected Essays. And it's it's a fantastic book, obviously, and all his writing's really great. I really love it. And there are quite a lot of things in it that are really quite esoteric, I think, you know. And so I guess that I'm not, I'm anti-novelty. I'm personally really anti-novelty, so I don't certainly wouldn't have an idea with something where I think, oh, people might be interested in this, so I need to make it. But I also am quite surprised. I think particularly with producing books, because you don't often, you know, you're not often in a situation where you're sitting where you can see a person reading the book that you've written. So you know it goes out into the world and it will get reviewed or whatever, you know, and you get feedback. But I think it's a strange missive to send into the world, I think.
Absolutely. It is, and it's sort of you know, strange feeling. Like I wasn't really expecting to have that feeling. I hadn't really thought about it, you know, before publishing books, like but all of a sudden I was thinking about, yeah, someone sitting with my book and like just sort of wondering what they would think about it, and feeling kind of alarmed.
Kathryn, could I ask on that point, how do you negotiate writing about real people? Is that a concern? And I'm talking specifically about Og9 Fog and Maria as well. Actually, in Master Rock, the characters are based on real people, and of course Don Sutherland. Is that something that would be at the back of your mind, to be respectful and to honor?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. With the diary, I think that was another thing that you know, I spent so long thinking about it because I sort of on the one hand knew that I wanted to do something with it and that I wanted to make it a book, you know, eventually. And then on the other hand, I, you know, was sort of questioning like the ethics of that, or like, you know, was it my right to do this with this text? And I think that, I mean, it's, you know, it's sort of a strange thing to do. But I think that ultimately the desire to make the book was coming out of a place of deep respect for this individual, you know, that kept this diary, and it experiencing, you know, coming into contact with the diary and reading the diary, it had such an impact on me that I guess I just kind of wanted to try to replicate that, or to, you know, like possibly share it with other people.
And you went, you traced the owner of the diary. Was that after you completed the project or during the project?
I had, the years that I was working on it, I had tried a few times to look online and see if I could find anything about this person, and couldn't really ever find anything. And then when the book was like going into production, I tried again, and then all of a sudden there was this new information online through like a genealogy website that hadn't been online before. Or actually, the first website that I got my lead on was this website called Find a Grave, which is like pictures that people take of tombstones and use it, you know, sort of like for genealogical purposes. But anyway, yeah, so the woman who wrote the diary died a long time ago, in the 70s. And she didn't really have any direct descendants. She just had a daughter, and her daughter didn't have any children. And but I was able to track down like a distant cousin before the book was published, and got her blessing, got the family's blessing to publish the book. And they were.
I wonder if there's more. I wonder if someone's alive, there's more responsibility. If they're alive, there's less responsibility and more responsibility if they're dead.
I think there is. Yeah.
Yeah, because if they're alive, you can talk to them, can't you? And you get their feedback. Whereas if they're dead, they're dead.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't want to get into this too much, but one of the 4 projects that I'm working on right now is working with a woman. I'm writing a book that's like based on recorded conversations that I've had with her. So it's like a similar process to Og9 Fog in a way of like using these transcripts to make a book. But yeah, she's alive. And so, you know, like we just talked on the phone yesterday, and I can definitely, you know, ask her things. And
yeah.
Mhm.
I'm working on a new project at
sorry.
the moment. Sorry, I was just very briefly, one of the projects I'm working on at the moment, it will be around the female mystic Julian of Norwich, a medieval kind of anchoress. And I feel, and as part of that, I'll be spending long periods of time in anchor holds and cells, kind of with durational, forcing myself. And I feel because it's a secular view on something that's within a very particular tradition and be read in a particular tradition, I feel a massive sense of responsibility towards Julian
Mm-hmm.
to make a good, I mean, it'll be a writing project obviously, but to make a good reading
Mm-hmm.
of her works. I feel
Mm-hmm.
a massive responsibility with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it will, there's no bottom to it.
Mm-hmm.
There will be no bottom to it except what medievalists say about it. And medievalists are fascinating, of course, but they're coming from a very, you know, it's from very very particular viewpoint,
Mm-hmm.
and with a particular sort of understanding of taxonomies. Yeah, sorry, I talked across you, Susan.
No, not at all. I was just going to say I shared Kathryn's piece from the Paris Review on Find a Grave that I can't read without breaking down and bawling like a baby. It's actually quite sad when you find out the bits that you have left out. But anyway, we're coming close to the end here, and I'd like to ask our audience if they have any questions, if they want to pop it into the chat box, and I'll read them out.
I can see it. Maria, the Orthodox Church still maintain the histories and practices of saints? Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, yeah, yes.
Someone, yeah, has got too many questions. So a little shy tonight, but anyway, I'd like to thank you both for joining me this evening. It has been an absolute pleasure. I'm a big fan of both your works, the same way, Maria, you are of Donald Sutherland. I'd just like to thank the university, Maynooth University, for hosting this, and Kildare Arts Office. And thank you both once again.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's so nice to talk to you both.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Nice to meet you, Kathryn.
Yeah, you too.